All right, everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. You know how it is these days? It feels like everything is getting more and more expensive, right? And honestly, I'm right there with you. It's tough out there.
Yeah.
So we had a listener actually write in with a question that I think a lot of us have been wondering about too. Can a president really do anything to lower prices nationwide? I mean, it seems like such a huge, complicated issue, right?
Yeah, it really is. And to answer your question, it's not as simple as yes or no. We've got this CBS News article about some of the steps that former President Trump took to try and tackle this issue.
Oh, interesting. So this was like during his presidency.
Exactly. We're going to be taking a look at that and kind of unpack it a bit because, we often think about the president as this incredibly powerful figure.
Right. Makes sense.
But when it comes to something like the economy, their ability to directly control things is actually pretty limited.
So are you saying that even if the president like signs an executive order or something, they can't just make prices go down?
Well, not exactly. It's definitely more complicated than that. I mean, think of it this way.
Okay.
The president can try to influence the direction of the economy for sure,
Okay.
but they can't just control all the different factors that go into things like, setting prices nationwide.
So it's more about like nudging things in a certain direction rather than like straight up dictating what happens.
Exactly. It's like trying to steer a giant ship, you know?
Gotcha.
You can set a course, but there are going to be currents and winds and all sorts of other things that are going to affect where you end up.
So what did Trump actually try to do then to lower prices? Like what kind of actions did he take?
Well, according to the CBS article, one of the things he focused on was trying to bring down the cost of prescription drugs.
I mean, that's definitely something that impacts a lot of people.
Absolutely. And his approach was to allow for the importation of cheaper drugs from Canada.
Oh, okay. So basically just getting them from somewhere where they're less expensive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But as you might imagine, that idea faced a lot of pushback, particularly from the pharmaceutical companies here in the US.
Yeah, I mean, they probably weren't too thrilled about that.
Not really. And, there were legal challenges and all kinds of complexities.
So even though it might seem like a straightforward solution on the surface, it ended up being pretty messy.
Oh, for sure. And that's kind of a recurring theme when it comes to these sorts of interventions in the economy, right? Like even when a president tries to do something with good intentions, it doesn't always translate into a smooth, easy fix.
Right. And the article even mentioned that a lot of people were skeptical about whether these executive orders were really going to work. I mean, what were some of the arguments against them?
One of the main criticisms was that these moves were more about appearance than substance.
So more about looking like he was doing something than actually making a real difference.
Exactly. Some critics argued that it was more about political optics,
I can see that.
showing voters that he was taking action, even if those actions weren't really going to solve the underlying
So
problems.
basically a Band-Aid solution for a much bigger issue?
Pretty much. And then there's also the whole issue of unintended consequences.
What do you mean by that?
Well, when you try to make changes to a system as complex as the economy, it's almost impossible to predict all the ripple effects. So something that might seem like a good idea in theory could end up having negative consequences down the line that you didn't anticipate.
So it's kind of a gamble in a way.
In a sense, yeah. You're
Yeah.
trying to do something positive, but there's always the risk that you might inadvertently make things worse in some other area.
So going back to our listener's original question, did any of these things that Trump tried actually work? Like, did they actually lower prices?
Well, that's where things get a little tricky. The article doesn't really provide a clear-cut answer.
Really?
It focuses more on the potential impact of these executive orders and the different arguments surrounding them, but it doesn't delve into the actual data on whether they succeeded in lowering prices.
Why is that? Like, why wouldn't they include that information?
Yeah. Honestly, it's incredibly difficult to isolate the impact of any one policy on something as big and complex as nationwide prices. There are so many other factors at play that it's hard to say for sure whether a particular action was the direct cause of a particular outcome.
So it's kind of a muddy picture then.
Very much so. And I think that's an important takeaway here. It's easy to think that there are simple solutions to these big economic problems, but the reality is that it's often much more nuanced than that.
So what are we left with then? It seems like we're saying that the president has limited power over prices, and even when they try to intervene, it's hard to know for sure whether it'll actually work.
Exactly. And I think that leads to some even bigger questions that are worth considering. If the president alone can't solve this problem, what other approaches might be more effective?
That's a good question.
Should we be looking at things like market-based solutions or community initiatives, or maybe a combination of different strategies?
I mean, those all sound like interesting avenues to explore for sure.
Yeah, I think the key takeaway here is that we need to avoid getting stuck in this mindset that the president is the only one who can fix things.
Right. It's not just about waiting for someone else to solve the problem for us.
Exactly. It's about thinking critically about the issue and exploring a range of potential solutions.
That's such a great point. And I think that's a perfect place to leave it for today's deep dive.
Mm.
To our listener out there who asked this question, thank you for sparking this conversation. And to everyone else listening, if you were president, what steps would you take to try and make things more affordable?
It's a great thought experiment.
Right, it is.
Mm.
What are the trade-offs involved and what other solutions might be worth considering beyond presidential action?
There's a lot to unpack there for sure.
Keep those brains working, folks. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone.